Hello, Black Justice family. If this is your first time here, please consider subscribing so we can spread our important stories to more people. For our returning subscribers, thank you so much for your unwavering support. It truly means a lot to our community. Now, sit back and join us as we dive into today's powerful story. She was pregnant, vulnerable, and just trying to get home. But when a racist cop stopped her, everything changed. He humiliated her, tore her dress, left her in tears. What he didn't know, she was married to a man who could destroy his entire career. Selena Hayes was not just any woman. She was the wife of Dominic Hayes, a powerful businessman who owned one of the largest security firms in the state. But Selena? She never flaunted her wealth. She believed in staying humble, living simply, and treating everyone with respect. She had spent years building a life on her own terms before she met Dominic. And now? She was 7 months pregnant with their first child they had prayed for. That night, all she wanted was to get home safely. But the moment she saw the flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror, she had no idea her entire world was about to be turned upside down. Selena had been driving home after a routine doctor's appointment. It was late, the streets were quiet, and she had been extra cautious driving well below the speed limit, making full stops at every sign. She wasn't in a hurry. She was just tired. Her back ached. Her feet were swollen. And more than anything, she just wanted to crawl into bed next to her husband. But then, the blaring sound of a police siren shattered the quiet night. Red and blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror. A sinking feeling settled in her chest. She hadn't done anything wrong. Why was she being pulled over? Selena took a deep breath, trying to calm herself as she slowly pulled over to the side of the road. Her heart pounded as she watched a tall, burly police officer step out of his car, adjusting his belt as he swaggered toward her vehicle. Something about him felt off. His expression was hard, unkind, and the way he looked at her, like she was already guilty of something. Before she could even say a word, the officer tapped aggressively on her window. "License and registration, now." His voice was sharp, impatient. Selena nodded, keeping her hands visible as she reached for her purse. "Officer, may I ask why I was pulled over?" she asked, keeping her voice polite. He scoffed. "You don't ask questions. You answer them. Now give me your ID." Her stomach twisted. There was no reason for this hostility. But she complied, handing him her driver's license and registration. He snatched them from her hands without a word, glancing at them before smirking. "Selena Hayes, huh? What are you doing driving this late?" Selena frowned. "I was just coming from my doctor's appointment. I'm pregnant." His eyes flickered to her stomach for the briefest moment before cold amusement flashed across his face. "Pregnant, huh?" he muttered, shaking his head. "You people always have some kind of excuse." Selena's breath hitched. "You people?" Her fingers curled into fists on her lap, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had dealt with racist remarks before. She wasn't going to let him get to her. But what he did next was something she never could have expected. "Step out of the car," the officer suddenly ordered. Selena's eyebrows furrowed. "Excuse me?" I said, "Step out of the car." Her pulse spiked. "Officer, is there a reason for this? I'm not armed. I haven't broken any laws." "Are you resisting?" He cut her off, his voice dangerously low. Selena swallowed. She had seen too many stories of traffic stops turning deadly. So, with trembling fingers, she unbuckled her seatbelt and slowly stepped out. The moment she did, the cold night air hit her skin, and so did the officer's scrutinizing gaze. "Turn around, hands on the hood." Tears burned in Selena's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She did as she was told, placing her hands on the cold metal of her car hood. And then, she felt his hands on her. Rough, unnecessary, violating. His hands patted her down, moving over her arms, down her back until he reached the hem of her dress. She froze. "What are you doing?" she whispered. He ignored her. Before she could even react, he yanked at her dress. The fabric ripped. Her breath hitched as a chilly gust of wind hit her exposed skin. The humiliation was instant. She felt her stomach turn, her baby kicking inside her as if sensing her distress. "Stop!" she gasped, twisting away, her arms instinctively covering herself. "I'm pregnant." But the officer just laughed. "Should have thought about that before running your mouth," he sneered. Tears welled in Selena's eyes. She had never felt so small, so dehumanized. And worst of all, there was no one around to help her. At least, that's what she thought. Because what neither of them knew, help was on the way. And when it arrived, that officer's life would never be the same again. Selena stood frozen, her breath shaky, her body trembling from the cold night air and the violation she had just endured. The officer, his name tag read O'Connor, stepped back, sneering as if he had proven a point. She wrapped her torn dress around herself, her hands trembling as she covered her pregnant belly. Why are you doing this?" she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. O'Connor scoffed, arms crossed. "Women like you think you can walk around like you own the world. Flash a little attitude, act all innocent, and people just let you do whatever you want." His lip curled in disgust. "Not tonight." Selena felt a rage rising inside her, a fire she never wanted to burn this bright. She had been disrespected before. She had faced racism before. But this was different. She was pregnant. She had done nothing wrong. And still this man had stripped her of her dignity like she was nothing. But she wasn't nothing. And neither was her husband. Selena forced herself to stand tall. O'Connor had expected her to break down, to beg, to crumble under his power. Instead, she lifted her chin and looked him straight in the eye. "I need to call my husband," she said, her voice firm despite the lump in her throat. O'Connor laughed. "Oh yeah? And what's he gonna do? Cry about it? Face it, lady. Nobody's coming to save you." Selena held her ground. "I'm calling him, now." O'Connor's face darkened. "Not happening." She swallowed hard. "Then arrest me. But you can't legally stop me from making one call." O'Connor gritted his teeth. He knew she was right. And the last thing he needed was for someone to catch him denying her that right. With a frustrated sigh, he pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Fine," he muttered. "Make your call. But don't think for a second it's going to change anything." Selena didn't waste time. With trembling fingers, she pulled her phone from her bag and dialed the one number that mattered most. The call rang once, twice. Then, "Selena?" The deep, commanding voice of Dominic Hayes came through the phone, laced with concern. That was all it took. The moment she heard his voice, she broke down. "Dominic, help me." A deadly silence followed. Then, "Where are you?" Selena struggled to speak between shaky breaths. "Pulled over near Greenway." "Tore my dress. O'Connor snatched the phone from her hand. "All right, that's enough," he barked, ending the call before Dominic could respond. But it was too late, because Dominic had heard enough. And O'Connor? He had just made the worst mistake of his life. The storm approaches. Selena's heart pounded as O'Connor tossed her phone onto the hood of her car. "You think calling some rich boyfriend is going to change anything?" he taunted. Selena wiped her tears, her anger replacing her fear. "He's not my boyfriend," she said coldly. O'Connor raised an eyebrow. "Oh, then what is he?" A slow smirk crossed Selena's face. "He's your boss's boss." O'Connor's smirk vanished. But before he could react, the distant roar of engines filled the air. O'Connor turned his head as a convoy of black SUVs sped toward them, headlights slicing through the night. Selena's breath hitched. She had seen these cars before her husband's security team. And if they were coming in full force, it meant Dominic was beyond furious. The vehicles screeched to a halt, and before O'Connor could reach for his radio, the doors flew open. 4 massive men in black tactical suits stepped out first, their expressions cold, deadly, professional. And then, Dominic Hayes stepped out. The moment Selena saw him, her legs gave out. But before she could hit the pavement, was there. "I got you," he murmured, arms wrapping around her, shielding her from the world. She clung to him, sobbing into his chest. He touched me. Dominic's entire body tensed. His jaw clenched so hard, Selina thought his teeth might break. Then he turned to O'Connor. And the look in his eyes? It was pure, seething rage. O'Connor took a half-step back, suddenly aware of how small he was compared to Dominic. But it wasn't just Dominic. It was the entire team of armed security standing behind him. It was the power of the man he had just messed with. "You?" O'Connor started, but his voice cracked. Dominic didn't speak. Not at first. He simply reached into his pocket and held up a badge. A badge that read, Chairman of the City Police Oversight Board. O'Connor's face turned ghost white. "That's right." Dominic finally spoke, his voice dangerously low. "I own the company that funds half of this department. And as of 10 minutes ago, I'm on the phone with your commissioner." O'Connor staggered. "Listen, man, two didn't know." "You didn't know?" Dominic took a step closer. "You didn't know she was my wife? You didn't know she was pregnant? You didn't know you were violating a woman who did nothing wrong?" O'Connor swallowed hard. "I?" "Shut up," Dominic snapped. O'Connor flinched. The silence stretched. Then Dominic nodded toward his security team. "Arrest him." O'Connor's eyes widened in horror. "Wait, what?" "You can't." Before he could finish, strong hands grabbed him, yanking him backward. A pair of silver handcuffs clicked around his wrists. And for the first time all night, O'Connor was powerless. A new dawn. As O'Connor was dragged away, Dominic turned back to Selina, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're safe now," he whispered. She nodded weakly, exhaustion finally taking over. "Let's go home." Dominic picked her up in his arms and together. They left behind the nightmare. But as they drove away, one thing was clear. That officer had spent the night abusing his power. Now, he would learn what real power looked like. Selina sat in the back of the black SUV, wrapped in a warm blanket Dominic had placed over her shoulders. The weight of the night pressed heavily on her. But for the first time since the traffic stop, she could breathe. Dominic sat beside her, his hand tightly gripping hers, his jaw clenched, eyes locked on the road ahead. He was furious, not just angry, but the kind of quiet rage that could burn entire empires down. His men had taken care of O'Connor, ensuring he was arrested on the spot. But Dominic wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. He turned to the driver. Straight to the commissioner's office. Selina blinked, snapping out of her exhausted daze. "Dominic, home. I just want to go home." He looked at her then, his eyes softening for the first time that night. He reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You think I'm letting this go?" She shook her head. "No, but..." "Then trust me." Selina sighed, leaning back against the seat. She was tired. So incredibly tired. But she knew better than any when Dominic set his mind on something. Nothing could stop him. Tonight, he was out for blood. The commissioner's office. The meeting that changed everything. It was past midnight by the time they reached the city's police headquarters. The grand building loomed ahead, its towering glass windows reflecting the streetlights. Inside, officers worked late-night shifts, some glancing curiously at the convoy of black SUVs pulling up outside. By the time Dominic stepped out of the vehicle, word had already spread. They knew who he was. And now, they knew something was about to go down. Selina stayed in the car while Dominic stormed into the building, flanked by two of his top security men. They walked straight through the lobby, past the startled receptionist, and toward the commissioner's office. The door swung open so hard it slammed against the wall. Commissioner Raymond Harrington, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a sharp suit, looked up from his desk, startled. "Dominic?" he asked, standing. "Sit down," Dominic said coldly. Harrington frowned. "What the hell is going on?" Dominic tossed a file onto the desk. Harrington looked down. His face paled. Inside the folder were images from the traffic stop granny, but clear shots taken from a security camera Dominic had installed in Selina's car. They showed everything. O'Connor pulling Selina from the vehicle. O'Connor ripping her dress. The fear in her eyes. Harrington's lips pressed into a thin line. "Where did you get these?" "Doesn't matter," Dominic said. "What matters is that your officer assaulted my pregnant wife. Harrington inhaled sharply. Dominic, I'm not here for excuses. Silence. Dominic's voice was calm, but deadly. I want his badge. I want his career over. I want his name dragged through the mud the same way he tried to humiliate my wife. Harrington sighed, rubbing his temple. Look, I understand you're upset, but… Dominic slammed his hands on the desk. Harrington flinched. Upset? That's an understatement, Ray. He leaned in, his voice low. I own half the contracts that fund your department. If you don't fire Haim effective immediately, I'll make sure every single deal I have with this city is gone by morning. Harrington's face drained of color. He knew Dominic wasn't bluffing. A long silence stretched between them before Harrington finally let out a resigned breath. He's done. Dominic nodded once. And the press? Harrington swallowed. We'll release a statement first thing in the morning. Dominic straightened, adjusting his suit jacket. Make sure you do. He turned on his heel and walked out without another word. By morning, the city was on fire with news of what had happened. Officer fired for assaulting pregnant woman, shocking footage released. Business tycoon Dominic Hayes takes down corrupt cop who targeted his wife. Police department under fire for racial profiling incident, commissioner speaks out. Selena watched the reports from their bedroom, still curled up in bed, feeling a strange mix of relief and disbelief. It was over. O'Connor had been publicly disgraced, arrested, and stripped of his badge. But even with justice served, she couldn't shake the memory of that night. She flinched when she felt a hand on her shoulder, but relaxed instantly when she realized it was Dominic. It's done, he murmured, sitting beside her. Selena looked at him, her eyes searching his. Is it? Dominic exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I made sure of it. She studied his face, the exhaustion, the tension still lingering in his jaw. And you? She asked softly. What about me? You haven't slept either. Dominic smirked, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I'll sleep when I know you're okay. She reached for his hand, squeezing it. I'm okay, Dominic. I promise. He exhaled slowly, as if trying to believe it. I hate that this happened to you, he said after a moment. I hate that it happens to so many people. Selena nodded. Because that was the real problem, wasn't it? It wasn't just her. This kind of abuse of power happened every day. She had been lucky. Others weren't. She placed a hand over her belly, feeling the gentle movement of their unborn child. We'll teach our baby better than this world, she whispered. Dominic's eyes softened. Yeah, we will. And for the first time since that horrible night, she finally felt safe again. A few weeks later, Selena and Dominic attended a press conference. Selena stood tall beside her husband, addressing reporters as they asked how she felt about the incident. I'm grateful for justice, she said, voice steady. But I also know that this fight isn't over. My story had a good ending because I had power behind me. Others aren't so lucky. She looked directly at the cameras. This isn't just about me. This is about making sure it never happens to anyone else. The cameras flashed, reporters scribbling notes, but Dominic? He just looked at his wife with pure admiration. Because even after everything, Selena wasn't just thinking about herself. She was thinking about everyone else who had ever been in her shoes. And if she had anything to do with it, this was just the beginning of something bigger. The days following the incident were a whirlwind. Selena and Dominic had expected media coverage, but they hadn't expected the national outcry. Social media exploded with people sharing their own stories of police abuse, racial profiling, and injustice. The hashtags number Justice for Selena and number End Police Abuse were trending for days. But for Selena, this wasn't just about her anymore. She couldn't stop thinking about the other women, the ones who weren't married to powerful men, the ones who didn't have an army of security guards or direct access to the police commissioner. What would have happened to them? What had already happened to countless others? She sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. Dozens of messages flooded in, some from reporters, others from victims of police brutality, people who saw her as a voice for something greater. Dominic entered the room, setting a cup of tea in front of her. You've barely slept, he said, sitting beside her. Selena sighed. I can't stop thinking about how many others have gone through what I did without anyone to help them. Dominic studied her carefully. You want to do something about it? She met his gaze. I have to. Dominic nodded slowly, as if he had expected this. Then let's do it right. Selina frowned. What do you mean? He leaned forward, his voice serious. You don't just want justice, Selina. You want change. So let's build something. A foundation, a legal fund, something that actually helps the people who don't have our resources. Selina's heart raced. A foundation. A movement. Something real. She exhaled, a new fire igniting inside her. Let's do it. And just like that, a simple traffic stop turned into something much bigger. Selina wasn't just a victim. She was about to become a leader in the fight for justice. The decision to start a foundation wasn't just an emotional one, it was a necessity. Selina knew that for every story like hers, there were 100 more that never made the news. Women, men, families, people who had been humiliated, abused, and denied justice simply because they had no power to fight back. So, she and Dominic got to work. Within a week, they assembled a team of legal experts, activists, and community leaders. Within a month, they had secured funding from major investors who believed in the cause. And within 3 months, the Justice for All Foundation was born. A national movement dedicated to holding law enforcement accountable, providing legal aid to victims, and pushing for systemic reforms. But Selina didn't just want to fund it. She wanted to be on the front lines. She gave speeches. She met with politicians. She told her story not as a tragedy, but as a call to action. And soon, people started listening. One morning, Selina received a letter. It was from O'Connor. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The letter was short, apologetic but hollow. I was wrong. I let my prejudices guide me, and I hurt you. I'll never undo what I did, but I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Selina stared at the words. Did he really expect her to just move on? She exhaled, setting the letter down. Dominic entered the room, noticing her expression. What's wrong? She slid the letter across the table. Dominic read it, then scoffed. Forgiveness? He nearly destroyed you. Selina bit her lip. I don't care about his apology, but I do care about what happens next. Dominic leaned in, his eyes studying her. What do you want to do? Selina thought for a long moment. Then she knew. I want to face him. A week later, Selina found herself standing in a prison visitor's room. O'Connor sat across from her, wearing an orange jumpsuit, his wrists cuffed. He looked nothing like the arrogant man who had humiliated her. He looked small, defeated. She sat down, folding her hands in her lap. Why did you do it? She asked, her voice steady. O'Connor sighed. I don't know, he muttered. I guess I was just raised to believe people like you were trouble. Selina's jaw tightened. People like me? O'Connor looked ashamed. Black, successful, unapologetic. She let his words sink in. This was the truth. He had seen her confidence as a threat, her success as a challenge to his power. I won't forgive you, she said finally. But I do hope you learn from this. O'Connor nodded slowly, his eyes filled with something she hadn't expected, genuine regret. She stood, turning to leave. Wait, he called. She stopped. What are you going to do now? He asked. Selina smiled softly. Change the world. And with that, she walked away stronger than ever. Years passed. Selina's foundation grew beyond anything she had imagined. They passed new laws. They helped thousands of victims. And through it all, she never stopped fighting. One day, as she sat in her office, her now 3-year-old daughter ran in, giggling. Mommy? Selina scooped her up, holding her close. Dominic leaned against the doorway, smiling. Busy changing the world? He teased. Selina kissed their daughter's forehead, smiling back, one step at a time. Because this wasn't just about her past. It was about her daughter's future. And she would make sure no one would ever feel powerless again. True power isn't in wealth or force. It's in justice. If you believe in change, make your voice heard. Subscribe for more stories that remind us justice always wins.